of this module is discussion with the tutors. So I'll share my screen, and then we can talk about what the potentially the most exciting part of the course is going to be. Okay, can everybody see my screen and the modules? So today we're starting on a long journey, because the dissertation, your dissertation, doesn't have to be submitted until the beginning of January. So you have a full 8 months. However, it's a big piece of work, and it's imperative that you start to think about it and you start to prepare about it as soon as possible. Partly because it's a big project, but also because in many ways, as a lot of students find, it's the best and most interesting part of the course, because this is the opportunity for you to put together everything that you've learnt on the course, your own expertise, your own experience, and produce an original piece of work that's based on your interests. So although it might appear hard and difficult, it's actually incredibly rewarding, and that's what we found with all students. So today I'm just going to go through the basics of what a dissertation is. I mean, I'm sure some of you have already written a dissertation, know something about this, and look at some of the mechanics of it and some of the details about how it will work, when to submit, and things like that. So the first question, the most obvious question, is what is a dissertation? I think this is something that students sometimes don't fully grasp. The idea that the dissertation is just a longer essay is quite widespread, but I think it's a mistake to think about it like that. The longest essays you do in this course are 3,000 words, which you've just done, and the marks for that will be back with you, hopefully by the end of next week. However, doing a dissertation is actually a much more involved project. It requires much more committal, and also requires, in many ways, a greater part of yourself, because what we want the dissertations to be, and what hopefully you will take the opportunity to do as well, is to make the dissertation a piece of your own personal work that benefits either your interests, your passions, your career, and hopefully all three. So what do we actually mean by a dissertation? Well, it's got to be original. It's got to be all your own work. It's got to be in depth, in that it looks at all sides of the topic that you have chosen to investigate. It means that you find all the relevant sources, whether they are primary sources, which, as I'm sure you know, means sources that come directly from the people or the events involved, or whether it's secondary sources, which are what other people have written about your subject. It also means that the dissertation has asked the right questions. So, and this is one of the big differences between a dissertation and an essay. In an essay, just like the ones you've just done, you're answering really one question. A good essay will try and explore that question and look at what other questions that arise from that what other questions arise from that, and how to answer those. But in a dissertation, much of what makes a successful dissertation is the ability to ask the right questions about the subject. Not necessarily just one question, but a whole series of questions that arise from studying your subject and investigating the topic. And in some ways, and this is always an important thing to bear in mind, it's as important to ask the questions as what it is to come to some conclusions and supply the answers. Because in many things that we study, we're not able to provide a full and true answer to every issue, because it's an incredibly difficult issue, because there aren't enough sources to be able to examine the issue in detail, or because it's part of a process that will only finish in the future. So much of the emphasis on a dissertation is about you being able to demonstrate that you know what the right questions are to ask. You may not have all the answers, but if you know the questions, that's what makes a good dissertation. It also has to be substantive. And by substantive, we mean that the dissertation is a serious piece of work which advances the knowledge we have about your subject. It's also something that could be used by other people who are studying the subject. And this is one of the things that makes it different from an essay. In a dissertation, you're trying to provide insights and an investigation into a specific subject that is much wider than a simple question. You're trying to provide more knowledge. You're trying to build on existing knowledge and develop something that other people can perhaps use in their work or in their studies. So it has to be substantive. And obviously, which appears to be obvious, it has to be written research. By which we mean it's a written dissertation. It's not a multimedia presentation. It's not an audio presentation, which you can do on some courses. And there's nothing wrong with multimedia presentations. But for our course, for this course, we are very keen on helping you to develop your writing and presentation skills. And so the dissertation is also designed to allow you to show your command of writing, of academic writing, of scholarly writing, but also to demonstrate your ability to prepare in-depth reports. Now, these may be very helpful in your current job or in your future job, or they may enable you to prepare other reports. So the dissertation is a way of combining scholarship, but also developing the tools that you need in the sports business, or in any business for that matter. And it helps you to develop the ability to write in-depth reports that can demonstrate a wide range of investigation and also to present those findings in a critical and comprehensive way. And so that also means that whilst it should be an academic piece of writing, it should be a scholarly piece of writing, it should also be accessible as well, so that a person who knows nothing about the subject, who may be interested in your area of investigation in your subject, could pick up the report and they could get knowledge and expertise from that without having to, shall we say, interpret academic jargon. So that's very important. The other key element of this is that the topic that you choose to investigate should be yours. It should be something that you are interested in. Obviously, we can help if needed, if you're unclear or you need help in deciding what the topic should be, or help in narrowing down a range of topics that you're interested in. Either myself, Simon, or Ed are around as ever whenever you need to speak to us about this. It's also worth bearing in mind that the range of topics that you can choose is, to a large extent, limitless. So you could choose a single topic. So, for example, I don't know, the origins of FIFA, if you want to do a historical exploration. It could be a theme which examines a particular aspect of sport over a period of time or across countries. Again, perhaps the relationship between the media and the Olympics, or a comparison of different sports medias in particular countries. Or it could be an issue. It could be a policy issue that is either important to your work or important to sport as a whole. So, for example, I guess how sport should respond to climate change. And that's a very wide subject, and you probably need narrowing down. But it's important to remember that because it's your chosen topic, you can choose anything that you think is important and worth investigating. And providing you can demonstrate that it's an important subject that you can study within a 10,000 word dissertation, will be very supportive of your choice in that. A good way of looking at this is to look at what our previous students have looked at in their dissertations. And again, just like you, students have chosen topics that they have some interest in, or that they have some value for their career development, or that has some broader policy issues. So I've just picked 5 at random from the past 6 years of the various master's courses that we've taught. And I think these all give a good insight into the type of things that you could think about doing. As I said, these are just randomly chosen. To start at the top, an investigation into decision-making in football substitutions in the English Premier League. Now, this was a very interesting subject that was chosen by one of our students about 4 years ago now, which looked at how important substitutions were in the English Premier League. The student looked at the times a substitution was made, the type of player that was substituted, a defender, a midfielder, or a forward, and looked at the influence of that substitution on the subsequent course of the game. And this ended up, after a lot of discussion, this ended up as a statistical analysis that actually demonstrated that substitutions later in Premier League games of forwards often had a significant bearing on the outcome of games. It could have easily been a different outcome, but the student did a huge amount of statistical analysis and then analysed it, and that was a significant piece of work, because he actually went back and looked at the last 30. Well, it would have been about 30 seasons of Premier League football to come up with his conclusion. That was a massive piece of work. I wouldn't recommend that you copy that model exactly, but again, it's a demonstration of the fact of what you can actually do in a dissertation. A kind of, if you like, micro policy issue of how do managers use their substitutes, and do substitutions really have an impact on the outcome of game? It's an important issue within football, and it's one that hadn't been looked at before. So that's one example. One that was done more recently, a couple of years ago, was a comparison of women and men's soccer in England, with the question being, are successful women's sports unique from their male counterparts? And so this student examined the finances of women's football, compared them to the finances of men's football, examined the way that the games were played, that women's football was played in comparison to men's football from a tactical point of view and a strategic point of view. And he also examined the fan experience. How different were the crowds between the male and the female game? And he actually came up with some very interesting conclusions about the difference between men's and women's football in England, and that essentially he found that, to a large extent, the audience for women's football was very different from the audience for men's football, in terms of the crowd, the composition of it, and also the atmosphere at matches. And he used those findings to develop um, a series of recommendations for the development of women's football, and encourage them to embrace the difference and not try to be a simply the men's game played by women. And that is an interesting question that I think is also something that we can see in basketball in the States, in the USA, when we compare the NBA and the WNBA. And so that's a very interesting subject. Moving away from that type of policy strategic issue, the next dissertation was how developments in golf equipment positively and negatively impacted, there's a misspelling there, professionals. And this was a look at technological advances in golf clubs and the difference that made to the professional game. And the student who did this one actually went and compared the performance of a couple of professional players using new state-of-the-art clubs in comparison to more traditional type clubs. And he found that it really did make it. The new clubs really did make a difference in terms of the distance that was able to be hit with drivers and the accuracy. And that allowed him to write a broader dissertation on the impact that technology has had on golf over the past 60, 70 years, where the game has progressed and has become much more skillful, players have become more powerful due to a combination of technology and player training. So again, this is an example of what you could look at in terms of policy, strategy, but also the impact of technology on sports, whether it's the playing of the sport or the mediatization of the sport. The fourth one I've chosen, again, focused very much on policy. It's called A Seat at the Table, Challenging Assumptions About Gender Quotas in Sports Governance. This did a lot of research into the way in which British sports have attempted to introduce quotas relating to gender representation on governing bodies. Most British sports now have have various means to try and increase female representation on their boards. This dissertation looked at how successful those changes to sports governance were on the governance of the sport, but also in encouraging other women to become part of the administration of sport, and whether pathways are open for women in sport. And quite interestingly, it found that, contrary to expectations, increasing the number of women on the governing bodies of national governing bodies of sport didn't really do very much to encourage other women to get involved in local or regional governance. So that raised a lot of very interesting questions for sports governing bodies in general. And the final one I've chosen, again, it's kind of policy, and this was written by one of our students who was and still is heavily involved in taekwondo. He was on the national governing body, and he had been he'd volunteered to become the governing body's representative on the safeguarding panel that taekwondo had established. Like most sports, certainly in Britain, I think pretty much around the world, safeguarding subcommittees of governing bodies have become very common over the past 10 years. And so he wants to, partly through his own, to develop his own knowledge in terms of his work with taekwondo. He also wanted to explore how other sports had dealt with issues of duty and care and welfare for elite athletes. And he came up with some very interesting findings in terms of how both safeguarding had become a very major issue for all sports in Britain and in Europe, but also how how safeguarding had not been fully implemented within those sports, and how indeed safeguarding measures that would had been put in place by sports were undermined by the day-to-day practice of those sports. And so this was this. I think this is a great example of how, if there are particular issues in the role that you play within sport, or the role that you want to play within sport, or that are directly relevant to your work, this is a good example of how the dissertation can help you use the knowledge you've gained through the course in order to explore these issues in more detail. So I think that gives a range of the type of thing that you can look at, whether it's out of fascination for the way sport works, as in this football substitutions, whether it's investigations the use of technology, whether it's about the culture of sport, or whether it's about policy issues in terms of governance, gender representation, or in terms of safeguarding. These are the types of areas that you can look at. Don't feel that the dissertation has to be if you like, a very academic subject. It doesn't. It can be very much focused on your personal interests. So, how to choose your research question? I think the answer to that is very simple. Choose something that motivates you. What are the issues in sport that concern you? What are the topics in sport that you feel passionate about? Because it's that depth of interest and your passion for a subject that will carry you through the dissertation. The research and the writing of a dissertation, as I've already said, is very different from writing an essay because it's a much longer piece of work, both in the time that you take to research and write it, but also simply in terms of the numbers of words you're expected to write. 10,000 words. It's a lot. 10,000 words is more than many of the academic articles you may have read in the past, which normally are between 5,000 and 8,000. 10,000 words is a lot. And if you don't feel motivated and passionate about your subject, it's going to get very difficult and very hard, and it will become a chore rather than a pleasure. So it's very important you choose something that you feel will sustain your long-term interest. Don't fall into the trap, as some students sometimes have done, and some of my students have, of choosing a subject that you feel very enthusiastic about at first, but then, within 2 or 3 months, decide that it's not the subject for you and change, because that makes it very difficult. You cut down the amount of time you've got, it cuts down the amount of research time, thinking time, and time to write. So it's very important you spend a lot of time thinking about what really interests you and what you really feel passionate about. So those are the two key things that you need to think about when it comes to choosing, because your dissertation is all about you. Unlike everything else you do on this course, where one of the lecturers will give you titles or will give you tasks, this is the place where you are in control, you are in command. Obviously in discussion with Ed, Sam and myself, but basically it's down to you. So be careful to choose a subject that you're interested in, that you're passionate about, and if possible, can also help your career. As you can see from the titles that I showed from previous master's dissertations, many of these were based around the key questions that people were facing in their day-to-day careers within sport. So you have a wide range of things to think about. So the next question to ask, once you've thought of your subject, the next question to ask in shaping your dissertation is, think about developing a research question. What is it you want to discover? And I often say to students, if you want to think about, the way to think about this, I think, is think about a legal case, a court case. And some of you, I'm sure some of you have experience in the law, and I'm not sure everybody's trained as a lawyer, but that's a very useful knowledge to have for this, because I think often a dissertation is about it's very similar to a legal case, that you are faced with a question and then you build a case to try and discover the answer to that question, in just the same way that a lawyer will pursue a case in court. You need to interrogate a subject and ask questions of it. And for a dissertation, you begin by coming up with a fundamental and overarching research question. What are you trying to find out in your dissertation? What is the question? So it could be, again, to refer back to the subjects we looked at from previous students. How does technology impact on golfers? Why has changes in governance that have sought to help women be better represented in sport, why does that seem to have failed? How can we better implement safeguarding practices within my sport? So your research question will probably have the words what, how, or why in it. And that research question will give you a framework for looking at your subject. What do you want to find out from your subject? Once you have come up with the question that you want to ask, and that can, remember, the other thing about this is that that is not fixed, because one of the great things about doing a dissertation and doing research like this is that sometimes you discover things that you did not know you didn't know. And as you do the research, you discover more things, and it may be that alters your research question slightly, that the assumptions that you have about a subject aren't actually, the research proves that they aren't actually correct. And so you have to reframe your question. So the research question really is, it's important to decide in order to give a thread to your research so you know what you're looking at. But it can only be provisional until you've completed your research. Then you know precisely what you're looking at and why you're looking at it and what the conclusions will be. But I can't stress enough, start with a question. Think about the question that you want to answer about your subject. After that, you need to define your aims and objectives. Is it going to be, in terms of aims, how are you going to explore the subject? Is it going to be an entirely desk-based piece of research where you use books, articles, web pages, material that's already been produced? Is it going to be something where you interview people to get their opinions, to investigate a subject? Is it going to be statistical analyses, like the one that looked at substitutions in the Premier League that I spoke about earlier on? Is it going to be a media survey? We're going to examine TV coverage, social media coverage, or is it going to be a combination of all three? So look at how you're going to explore the subject, and then look at your objectives. What do you hope to discover? Which takes us back to some extent to the research question. Are you looking to develop a new piece of policy? Are you looking to critique an existing policy? Are you simply looking to explore a historical subject and find out what relevance it has to us today? All of these things are possible, but again, it's important to get some idea of what your objectives are, because that again gives you some structure to your research. One of the things that I think is very important to try and avoid is not knowing when to stop research. Because a lot of people enjoy it. You start to read a lot of stuff, you can talk to a lot of people, and it's a very nice way of talking about sport and exploring in an intelligent way all aspects of the sport or sports that you're interested in. And on certain subjects, there's lots and lots of stuff. I mean, if you pick a subject in the history of football or the Olympics, you'll find that there's probably dozens and dozens of articles and books that have been written about it. If you haven't got a clear idea of what your objective is, or you have a research question that's not very clear, then there's the danger that you will just keep doing research, more and more research, and never come to any conclusions, never get to a stage where you can analyze your findings. So that, always bear in mind what your objectives are, because that gives you a sense of when to end your research. When you felt that you have discovered the key answers, or perhaps not even answers, aspects to your research question, the parameters of your research question, that's when you need to think about writing the dissertation in full. The other key aspect of thinking about your dissertation is to study what other people have said about your subject. And this is really about the secondary literature. Secondary literature is what other people have written about the subject. They're not participants in whatever the subject is. They haven't been in the governing body, or they haven't been at the event, or they've not taken part in it. These are the academics, the scholars, the journalists who have written about it. And that's called secondary literature. And it's important to find out what other people have said about your subject, because you have to demonstrate that really that you're an expert in your subject field. And being an expert means knowing what other people have said. It's also important because it means that you're able to put your research alongside what other people have already written. And you can use your research to discuss, does it contradict what they've said? Does it complement what they've said? Does it take their conclusions, current thought, does it take that further? How have you added to the research that's already been done? How have you become part of the study of that subject, whether it's by academics or journalists or whoever? That's an important thing to bear in mind, that you have to be, in a sense, you have to demonstrate your mastery of what other people have written, certainly what the main people have written about your subject. But also you have to try and think about yourself as being involved in a dialogue with those people, that you're assessing your research alongside their findings and their research, but also you're assessing their research alongside what you found, because you may well find things that haven't been discovered before, or that are slightly different, or at a slightly different angle to what is felt to be mainstream thinking on a subject. So think of yourself as someone who's engaged in this, that you're a participant in the debate. So those are the key things to think about when you're at an early stage with your dissertation, in terms of thinking about subject, research question, how you're going to go about it. What are the key things? So I'm going to look at practicalities now. So what is required of you? Well, the dissertation has three parts. There's a written research proposal of 1,000 words, which is 20% of the total mark. Then there is the actual dissertation of 10,000 words, which is 60% of the total mark for this module. And then there's also an oral presentation of your dissertation, 15 minutes, which is 20% of the total mark. And each of these is a vital part of the process. So the research proposal is important so that you can explain what you're going to do, and so that your supervisor and the people who mark that can also maybe suggest other aspects to your research that you haven't thought about. Suggest other readings, perhaps people that who've written about this that you're not aware of. The dissertation itself is obviously the key thing. I'll get into what that involves in the next slide. The other aspect of this, which I think is very important and is, you may think is nerve-wracking, but is actually a very enjoyable part of it, is an oral presentation of your dissertation. It's only 15 minutes. And that allows you to present your findings, but also for the examiners who have read your dissertation to be able to ask you questions about it. And so it becomes a discussion about what you've written about. It's a test of your knowledge, but also it's an attempt to perhaps get you to develop themes that you've spoke about in the dissertation, but could perhaps be drawn out a little bit more, could do with more explanation or more discussion. So it's really a way, I rather than think of it as an examination. You're not in the witness box, you're not on trial. It's a way of, in a sense, it's a way of increasing your mark by demonstrating how well you know your subject and how well you can discuss your subject. So that's how it's going to be marked. So there's the three aspects. The main aspect is the written dissertation, but the other aspects are just as important and also just as fulfilling, I think. In terms of thinking about how you look at your dissertation, how your dissertation should look, sorry. This is a rough guide to what it should contain and how the word count should be broken down. A lot of this seems obvious, but bear with me, because often it's easy to forget just how much you need to do on each section. And one of the traps that some students fall into is either not having a comprehensive introduction, or more commonly, not having a comprehensive conclusion. And people often lose marks by having a weak conclusion. So I'd say with the introduction, the key thing is to explain what your subject is, what your research question is, why is this important? Why are you studying this? Why should we be interested in this? And that really gives you a platform to say why your subject is important, both to yourself, but also in the study of sport and sports policy in general. The second part is the literature review, which is really your opportunity to show that you've read the main works dealing with your subject and that you understand those works, and also that you understand the debates that have gone on between the different scholars, the different writers on the subject. So, I mean, for the sake of example, if you're writing on the Olympics, there's virtually every subject that has ever been written about in the Olympics, it has some level of controversy. You can find two or maybe more opinions on virtually any aspects of the Olympics. So if you decided to do some aspect of the Olympics, then it'd be important that you could say, this is an important subject, and there's been a lot of writings about it. List some of the main examples, and then say about the debates that have taken place in the Olympics. So, for example, the Olympics, as we've already looked at, in terms of the place of women in the Olympics or the role of the media in the Olympics, commercialism, there's always controversy, there's always more than one view to take. So you need to demonstrate that you understand the different points of view that other people have taken out. Then you need to talk about your methodology, which is how did you go about doing your research? Why did you choose the methods of research? Why were they better than other methods? What are the key things to understand about your methods? So, for example, if you're interviewing people, it's very important to point out why you chose those people, what the difficulties were, what the potential pitfalls are, because obviously sometimes when you're interviewing people, they may simply be expressing the official view of matters, or they may have, and these are both extreme examples, or they may have a cause to complain about the issue that you're talking about. So it's important that you demonstrate that you know how to carry out the type of research that you're doing and what the strengths and weaknesses of that approach are. You may also, if you choose and it's relevant, you may also look at some of the discussions that have taken place about different research methodologies, if you feel it's relevant. There are, as I'm sure if you studied social policy or any of the humanities, I'm sure you'll be aware that there is almost as much debate on research methodologies as there is about any other subject in academia. So if you think it's relevant to your study, talk about that a little bit as well. And then your research findings and discussion is the main part. And that's where you talk about what your research was, what you found, what your analysis of it is, and how that relates to what other people have said about the subject. That's really the meat of what your dissertation is, which I would hope is probably the most enjoyable part. Two final places. The conclusions are very important. You'd be amazed at how many students don't do a full conclusion. And your conclusion should really relate back to your introduction. What have you done? Have you demonstrated how important it is? Have you come up with any new insights into the subject? How does your research, how do your findings fit in with what other scholars or people who have inquired into this subject? Does it have any policy implications? Can we take this out and implement your recommendations? Are there any further issues that could be researched in the future? Maybe it's the case that as you've researched the issue, you found that there are many more aspects to it that you don't have space in a 10,000 word dissertation to look at. So the conclusion is very important. It really is your opportunity to demonstrate why your dissertation is important and why it is relevant to your work or to sport in general. The other aspect of it, which doesn't count towards the 10,000 word limit, is your bibliography. And that is the list of books, articles, websites, podcasts, films, documentaries, anything that you have used in your references in the dissertation has to go in the bibliography, but also any works that you've consulted that may not be referred to in your dissertation, but have had an impact on your thinking about the subject, they should go down there as well. The bibliography is really, see it as an opportunity to demonstrate that the breadth of your research. That doesn't mean say you should write down lists and hundreds of books, because obviously that's not going to raise suspicions. But if there are things that you've read or watched that have influenced your thinking, but you haven't had a space or an opportunity or a reason to put them in the references, then they should go down there in the bibliography as well. Obviously, all these word counts are ballpark figures. You may not spend 2,000 words on the literature review. You may want to write more than 5,000 words in the research findings and discussions. You'll only realise that, I think, when you start doing the work properly. But as a guideline, as an outline of how you should be thinking about how to break up your dissertation, that's a good model. What do you need to include? What do you absolutely have to include in the dissertation? Other than 10,000 words, you need to include a cover sheet. We have a specially designed cover sheet that must be put on the front of all dissertations. You can find that on the website. If you look go to the dissertation module website page, you'll find it there. The dissertation must also be properly referenced. Now, references and reference styles are subjects that academics love to discuss, and there is much controversy about which is the best form of referencing. To be honest, I don't really care. The main thing is that you choose a style of referencing that you are comfortable with and that you know. That could be, depending on what you've done at undergraduate level or if you've done previous postgraduate courses, that could be the Harvard system of referencing. It could be the MLA system of referencing. If you're a historian, you might want to use footnoting, classic footnoting style. It doesn't matter for the purposes of the dissertation. The key thing is that it must be one style and it must be consistent. And it is one of the things that we will give marks for. So think about that. Some referencing styles are more appropriate for different types of dissertations than others. So for example, if you were doing a straight history of, I don't know, history of UEFA, let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm not sure anybody would want to do that, but then if it's straight history, you may want to investigate footnotes. However, if you're looking more at a social policy type of dissertation, where you're looking at a wide range of different authors who have written things on policy, then a Harvard-style referencing is more common in that type of field, so use that. But the main thing is, whatever referencing style you have used in the past that you feel you know and you feel comfortable with, use that. As long as it's consistent, we don't care. The other mandatory inclusion, as I mentioned before, is the bibliography. One of the things I would mention about the bibliography is that the bibliography should probably be the first piece of writing that you do for the dissertation, because I've found, and I know some of my students have found, as soon as you start reading about your subject, write down what you're reading. Keep a list of what you're reading. And if you're going to keep a list, you may as well start it as a bibliography. Start as you mean to go on. And if you include everything that you read from today, if you want to start reading about what possible subjects you want, put that in your that can be your bibliography. And that means that by the time you reach the end of your dissertation, everything will be in your bibliography as a matter of course. And the only thing you have to do is to check that it is formatted correctly. So yeah, bibliography, probably the first thing you should start. So that's a tip for how to organize your work. Other tips, other things I would emphasize is that it's important to draw up a timetable and set yourself milestones. It's a big piece of work. It takes place over a long period of time. So you need to set yourself targets of when you're going to finish the various sections or when you're going to start the various sections and what you aim to have completed by a particular point in time. One of the problems that you may already have experienced either doing a dissertation at undergraduate level or even writing essays is that it's very easy to put off the research or the writing of a piece of work. And then you have a mad panic in the final days before the piece of work has to be submitted. If it's an essay, that's not a great situation to be in, but normally it's manageable. You may have to stay up all night writing the day before the piece of work is due to be submitted. But it's possible. It's not ideal, but people do it. With a 10,000 word piece of work, you can't do that. It's too much to do in a short period of time. And also, even if you could complete a dissertation in a week, say, for example, you would not be able to do the research to give the dissertation depth and insight and analysis that it needs. So I would highly recommend that when you have the time over the next month that you start to think about the subject you want to investigate and how you're going to divide your time up over the next 8 months to get that piece of work done. And by setting your own timetable, even if you don't meet the deadlines that you've set yourself, at least you can measure your progress. So that's an important thing. The other thing I would say is that if you're reading, make notes at the same time. One of the things, well, I have to say, I don't always do this, and because it's much easier to read a book and maybe put a sticky note next to a page, or to copy a page, or to take a scan of a page and then come back to it later. That's not great, even if you have a lot of time to write something, because there's always the problem that you forget what you've read. You mislay the book, the notes, the sticky notes that you've put on, or the pieces of paper you've put in the book to remind you fall out, or you can no longer remember why you put a bookmark at that particular point. I've done all of these things. So it's important when you're reading a book, also have a notebook or whatever you use to take notes and make your notes at the same time. Then you can keep track of what you've got. Starting bibliography when you start reading, which I've just mentioned. And my final point will be to write early and write often. Even if you're writing a 200-word snippet, nothing that you ever write is wasted, because it either will go into the final dissertation, or it can be amended, revised, edited, and used in that way. So any writing is good writing. The other thing that I would really stress, and I think this is true, and again, many people probably understand this anyway, it's important to write, even if you don't have to write a full chapter, you don't have to write a full section. When you start to think about what you want to say in your dissertation, you will find, I find this, whenever I write, you often think that you know what you want to write in your mind, that you understand the subject, that you have a good analysis of the subject. But when it comes to writing that understanding down or putting that analysis on paper, it's a very difficult thing to do, because the human brain is a remarkably complex organ, and expressing itself in written format involves a distillation of thought. And no matter how much you think that you have a convincing analysis in your mind, it's a different matter when it comes to writing that down, because writing is thinking, and it's in the process of writing, of finding out how to express your thoughts in words, that actually the dissertation and your analysis comes together. So it's important to start writing, A, because of the clock is ticking, time is running out as as we speak, the countdown has begun. But also it's important to write because that helps you think and clarify your ideas and your thoughts. So write early, write often. What else do we need to know? Oh, so what are we looking for? When it comes to being marked, what are we looking for in a good dissertation? A number of things. Clarity of your research aims. Make it clear what you are trying to do, why your research is important, how are you going to do it. Make sure that's clear, that it's straightforward, that it's understandable. When you're writing, put yourself in the position of someone who doesn't know anything about the subject. Can you explain it in clear terms to that person? We're also looking for methodological rigor. When you have done the research, when you are doing the research on your subject, have you looked at all sides of the question? Have you looked at what the weaknesses in your argument or your approach are? Have you asked the right questions, and have you used the best research methods to answer those questions? As I said earlier on, one of the key things to understand about doing a dissertation is that although you start with a research question, sometimes it's not possible to come up with all the answers or an easy answer. So we're looking, and in fact, this is true of all scholarly work, we're looking for your ability to ask the right questions. And so when it comes to methodological rigor, we're looking at how you approach your research question, how you do your research, and how aware are you of overcoming the difficulties that you encounter, either in the type of research you're doing, or the questions that you're asking. In a sense, we're asking you to be self-critical in order to really make your dissertation the best it can be. We're also looking for good critical engagement with the secondary literature. As I mentioned before, you should see your dissertation as being in dialogue with what people have already written, and think of how your findings, your analysis, how that complements other writers, how that perhaps contradicts what they've read, or sorry, what they've written, or more importantly, in a sense, how it engages with those debates. What insights does your research and analysis bring to the books and the debates that have already been written about the subject? We're also looking for quality of analysis. That means clarity of thought. That means awareness of the issues in your analysis. We're also looking at your ability to deal with secondary sources, potentially, if you choose to use them, primary sources, particularly if you choose to interviewing or some kind of survey. How good is your understanding of the issues involved in those, using those primary sources? Do you give sufficient weight to all the arguments in the debate? Are you aware of the weaknesses of your analysis, potential weaknesses of your analysis? How could people who don't share your, are you aware of how people who don't share your particular view or your analysis, how could they criticize, and how would you respond to them? Really, I think the key to quality of analysis is for you to demonstrate that you have explored your research material to its fullest in terms of what you can actually research, but also that you have anticipated all the possible problems that there might be with your research. We're also looking at your ability to communicate, that it's well written, it's well presented, and that it's persuasive. Again, this goes back to thinking of your dissertation as partly almost like a legal case. Can you convince us that the case you've made for your particular analysis is correct? And then finally, the overall coherence of the project. Does it all hang together? Does it all make sense when you read all 10,000 words? And does it add to our understanding and knowledge of the subject? Has it made a real contribution? So those are the key things that we're looking for when it comes to marking, and the type of things that we would ask in the oral presentation. So that's basically it. I just want to run through some other issues that you might want to think about. You're probably already thinking about. Obviously, a key one, given the age that we're living in, is the use of generative AI. Okay, so you can use generative AI for some research tasks. However, you have to acknowledge the use of AI tools when you submit your work for assessment. And this includes if you've used it to generate materials for background research, and independent study. You can find the full guidelines to this on the dissertation module webpage. If you've got any further questions about it, just ask us. In terms of language, we would encourage you to write the drafts and obviously the final assessment in English. If you want to use grammar checking software, that's fine. Spell checking software, that's fine. But you must be the author and the writer of the work. It's always a good idea to keep your drafts as well, to be able to demonstrate that. But again, you can see the guidelines on the webpage, on the dissertation module webpage. And again, if you've got any more discussion, if you want any more discussion on that, we're only too happy to talk about it. Do you need ethical approval? Often when you're writing a dissertation, you will need to demonstrate that you're aware of any ethical issues and that you have taken the appropriate measures to safeguard your participants in some way. And in some subjects, although I don't think this will apply, to safeguard yourself. We have an ethical approval process, and once you start to discuss with us what subjects you're going to choose, we can discuss with you whether you need ethical approval. In general, if you are using human subjects, so interviews, records of living people, or you're looking at subjects that involve potentially harmful activities, I'm thinking in particular things like drug use or other forms of cheating, or controversial issues such as physical abuse in sports or things like that, then yes, you definitely do need ethical approval. If you're researching anything to do with children, you will also need ethical approval. And I have to say that's I would, because of the ethical issues involved in researching children, I would suggest you don't do it. It's too complex and too difficult. But again, we can discuss this on a one-to-one basis, and we'll discuss it well in advance. So it may mean that either you have to get ethical approval where you didn't anticipate it, or it might mean that because of the subject that you've chosen, you may need to revise it in some way in order to get ethical approval. But again, we can discuss that on a one-to-one basis with you near the time. Key question: who will be our supervisor? At the moment, we don't know. Once we've started to discuss what your subjects are going to be, then and I would encourage you, all of you, to contact either myself, Simon, or Ed to discuss this. Then we'll make a decision fairly quickly as to who your supervisor will be, and there will be someone that you can work with, go to for advice, potentially share drafts of what you've written, ask questions, draw on their experience. So you supervise. You're not a dissertation it's your project, but it's not. You're not alone. There's a lot of help available from any or all of us. I think that's the other thing. As hopefully you're aware now, we're kind of a team. And our way of operating as a team is that just because, for example, I'm your supervisor, it doesn't mean say you can't talk to Ed or Simon, and same goes for them as well. So whatever you think you need for your dissertation, you can ask your supervisor, but you can also ask the rest of us. And finally, what's the timetable? It's self-explanatory. 2nd of November, dissertation proposal. 4th of January, dissertation to be submitted. 11th of January, oral presentations begin. We won't do them all on the same day because we won't be able to fit them in all on the same day. So a bit closer to the time, we'll allocate which days according to your preferences to do that. So, but those are the dates you should be working to. But as I'm trying to emphasize throughout this, start thinking about it now, start discussing it now. And finally, good luck, and I hope you enjoy yourself, because as a lot of students discover, it's the most enjoyable part of the course, because it's where you can be yourself and where you can put your expertise and what you've learned on the course to good use and develop a piece of work that you can be proud of, but also that hopefully you can use as part of your career development. So I'll leave it there. And if anybody has any questions or anything they want to talk about, feel free. Noof, sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, Noof.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding the subject. Shall we wait for the supervisor to be assigned to us, or we can ask initially our personal tutor regarding the subject that comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think you can, I'd encourage you to start thinking about the subject you want to do now, and then you can raise it with your personal tutor, and then we can feed it into the discussions about who should supervise. It may be a personal tutor, but it could be that someone else has, more appropriate experience. I suppose if you were, I don't know, take an example. If you wanted to do something about cricket, then obviously Ed. If you wanted to do something about equality and diversity policy, probably Simon, although we could all do that. And if you chose to do something about rugby, then you'd probably want me to do it. But don't be limited by what the expertise of the supervisors are, because hopefully between us we've got the experience and the knowledge to be able to supervise whatever subject you choose to do. So but start thinking about now. Talk to your personal tutor about it.
Sure.
And we'll take it from there.
Yeah, another question. When we submit it, it's the final. You're not going to re-review it and then the final submission date. You're not going to re-review it and then send it for correction, review. The final submission is the final.
It's the submission date is the final date.
The final.
Yes. But you can. The key thing to remember is that you can discuss it with your supervisor or personal tutor or any one of us all the way through the process. So if you wanted, I think it's the same for Simon and Ed, but for example, if I was your supervisor and you had drafted a section, you'd written a draft of a section, you wanted to discuss it, I would be more than happy to discuss that with you. So by the time it comes to you submitting your final dissertation, you will have discussed it thoroughly with your supervisor. So yeah, don't worry about that. We're there for any help that you need.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Talal, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
No.
I think Ibrahim Basim before me.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah,
go ahead, Talal. Go ahead.
Ibrahim.
Okay, thank you, Basim. I know it's early question, but for the submission number 3, are the presentation, are the coordinator they gonna like schedule the live presentation on January 11th? Then after that, in January 12th, we will submit the material through the website.
Yeah. So we'll ask you to submit your material, but also to do, we'll arrange dates for you to do the presentation.
Okay, because the submission it's on January 12th. And I think in your presentation say January 11th. Is it like the presentation?
Oh, really? Sorry, I must have made a mistake. Sorry. Yeah, that's my mistake. Sorry. Yeah, I shall change that. Yeah.
So we will submit, then they will coordinate and live. So we will not like record the presentation.
No. That might be possible in extreme circumstances, but in general, no, because it's an opportunity to discuss your presentation.
Good.
So we can ask you questions about it, and you can explain more. Yeah. So that's the purpose of it. So it's a discussion.
We will submit the material, then we will wait for the email to say when time we will do the presentation live to the journey. Perfect. Thank you.
And we'll also make sure that it suits the time that you have to make your presentation fits in with your work. So we will ask you when what your preferences are.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. Basim, sorry.
Thank you, Professor Tony, and good evening to everyone. I just wanted to have an assurance of when are we going to have the mentors and supervisors assigned, so we can have the one-to-one ongoing during finalizing this dissertation. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll try and sort that out this month. If you need to talk to somebody immediately, speak to your personal tutor. And also, if you have a preference for a supervisor because you think their excuse me, if you think their expertise is more suited, as I say, I use the example, if you want to write something about cricket, then I think Ed would obviously be the person to have as supervisor. Then you can also ask them as well if you have a particular preference. But we will try and sort the supervisors out by the end of April. You will know. It's possible that many of you will have your personal tutor as your supervisor, but that depends on the subject that you choose, perhaps your own personal preferences as well. And we will try to accommodate those preferences. So it's a two-way street. You need to start thinking about what your subject might be, and you're not held to do that. That subject that you can't change your mind. But if you think about your subject or the broad subject area, and you think about who the most appropriate person on the teaching team will be, then that would help us a lot as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Talal again, sorry.
Sorry, Professor, again. For when you say like other student dissertation, if we choose the topic, do you prefer to go to the library and search about is there like any student dissertation over there so we can read it?
Yeah, sure. Yes, you can. I'm trying to think where they are. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, you can download other student dissertations and read what they've done. And I think that's a great way of understanding what's required, what and what the dissertation should look like, what's involved, but just give you but most important, to give you a sense of the standard that we're looking at and the type of thinking that we're looking for as well. So yeah, I will circulate. I will circulate the website reference for the
Thank you.
previous student dissertations. I'll do that.
Thank you.
I'll do that later on tonight and get it back to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Oh no. Nufti, do you want to say something again?
Thank you, Prof. I just had to leave. I have an appointment. Thank you. For everybody.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, good to see you. Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you, Nuf. Bye.
I think one of the things about kind of unless anybody's got any other questions, my final point about this would be, it's a process, and it's important for you to think about what you want to do early, but that can also change. That your research question may change as you start to read more or you do the research, and your approach may change, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's part of it's a voyage, it's a journey, and sometimes you don't end up exactly where you thought you would end up. So I think that's the way to view it. The important thing initially now over the next 2 or 3 weeks is just to start thinking about what you want to write about, what's important to you, what's most interesting to you, what do you think could assist you in your career if that's where you want to go in terms of the dissertation. And we will give any help that we can, that you want, in terms of preparing the dissertation, materials to read for the dissertation, the direction you want to take with the dissertation. And also, again, it's a process with us, so you're not alone. If you want to get in touch with your supervisor or your personal tutor on a regular basis, that's great. If you think you know what you want to do and you've got a very precise idea and you want to explore it before talking to your supervisor, again, that's also fine. Basically, we are here to help you write the best dissertation, the most useful dissertation you can. So if you think of us in that way, then that's a good starting point for going forward. Is anybody else? Oh, Ali, sorry, I didn't see.
Good evening, everyone. I want to ask a question about the subject and how wide can we go in this subject. Like on top of my head, I'm thinking, considering my background, I want to write something like about sport administration from like economic or finance perspective.
Yeah.
How close get to like sport?
Well, that sounds great. Well, sorry, it's not a great line. So you said you want to talk about sports governance through economics and finance?
Yeah, like administrative aspect.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Well, that sounds like a fascinating subject. So, to be honest, I can't think of any subject that we wouldn't want you to do. I think that between the three of us, we've got, even if we're not experts in the subject area, between the three of us, we know enough about how to ask questions, how to construct a dissertation, how to conduct scholarly investigation and research to keep you on the right path. And also, I think the other thing to bear in mind, as we constantly stressed throughout this course, is that it's, to some extent, it's also a learning process for the lecturers, and we learn from you. And so, to some extent, the subjects that you choose, we would want to be part of the dialogue, because we can learn from your expertise and your experience, as well as you learning from what we have to offer. So, in terms of doing, if it's connected, I think that I can't think of any subject that is connected to sport, from the anthropology of sport, if you like, to the economics of sport, to the philosophy of sport, to the history of sport, to sports policy, to sports governance. I don't think there's anything that would be out of the range of this course, and this particular module. So feel free. If you think, I mean, if you think that might be an issue, we're more than happy to discuss it and figure out a way to make it happen for you. So yeah, don't worry about that.
Thank you, Doctor.
I think the thing to bear in mind is that this is your topic, it's your subject, and we're here to support you to make the best out of your research. And if that means that we need to do research to help you, then we'll do that research.
I believe we've got a question from Yara, Tony. And if you sometimes
sorry, I
like to
didn't
see on the
see it.
screen.
Sorry, yeah, I can't say. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
you're all
yeah.
good.
Hi, Professor. I hope you're doing
Hi,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So the topics can be related to Saudi sports, Saudi federations,
Absolutely.
locally,
Yeah.
I mean. Okay, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And again, one of the things we're very, through the whole course, but particularly for the dissertation module, is that if there is an issue in your sport or your governing body, or something that's directly related to your job within sport, we generally think that's a great topic for a dissertation. And we've had a number of students who have done that in the past. So, for example, we've had quite a few students from the Football Association, the English Football Association in the past. And we're quite proud of the fact that some of the dissertations that they've done have been on direct policy issues that affect the English FA and their jobs in it. So, for example, one of our students looked at the question of racial equality policies within the Football Association and how they could be developed, because he was one of the equalities managers, and still is, within the Football Association. Another one was about how to develop female senior managers within the Football Association, and that was a very much, and that was written by a woman who's no longer, used to be the head of player development in the FA, and she was looking at a very specific subject that she'd actually been asked to look at by the FA, about how could they develop more, how could they develop their systems so that they were more welcoming to women at a senior manager level, because there was an imbalance of senior managers in favour of men, and the FA had set themselves a target of having 50% of female senior managers by I think it's last year, 2025, and they were lagging behind that. And so the student who did that actually contributed very much to the governance policy and practice of the FA. So if you wanted to do something that related directly to your job at Saudi Sports Federation, whatever the subject, then again, absolutely, we'd be more than happy to help you with that. Mansoor.
Yes, hi, Professor. I wonder
Hi.
if we can publish the final dissertation. It may need some further academic review later on, but as a next step, is that something happened before? Is this one of the objective of the course or not?
Yes, absolutely. We're currently looking at ways to publish dissertations. But that doesn't mean to say that we wouldn't encourage you to publish elsewhere. And certainly, I think that many of our best dissertations that have been done in the past could be published in academic journals. They've been at that standard. And I would imagine, this course is no different. So yes, we would encourage you to think about publishing if that's what you choose to do. Hopefully by the summer, we may be able to make some announcements about our own publishing plans as well. We're still in discussions about it with various people. But yes, absolutely, not least because it's another way in which the dissertation and the course as a whole, but particularly the dissertation, can help you in your career, because having publications will often help your career. So yeah, absolutely, we'd love you to do that. Has anybody else got any questions? Okay, well, I'll start to wrap up. I think there's 2 points. Firstly, I think whatever you want to do with it, as I've tried to stress, whatever you want to do with the dissertation, I think you can do. And that extends to the subject matter, to the way you do it, and to what happens to that, what happens to your dissertation subsequently, in terms of publication, in terms of using as a report internally for your organisation, anything like that. That's really what this course is about. We're about applied knowledge. And this is really an opportunity for you to make the most of that. So anything you want to do, I think we can do, and we can help you to achieve your goals with the dissertation, either in terms of your career or whatever you want to do with it. And the final point is one that I've stressed throughout this, and I always do. If you've got any further questions, if something occurs to you that you forgot to ask, or something that occurs to you as you're thinking about the subject, don't hesitate to get in touch with me or your personal tutor, or both. We're more than happy to help out. As I said, the dissertation is a process, and often it takes a while for your thought processes to really get on top of it. And so there may be things that you haven't thought about today that may come into your mind tonight, tomorrow, later on this month, whatever. If you do have any questions or points you'd like to discuss, just let us know, and we can have a Teams chat or however you wish to do it. But as I said at the end of the presentation, it's a great opportunity to do some really good work and to enjoy yourself. So unless there's anybody else with any questions, I'll wrap up, and then I hope to hear from you, and you'll certainly hear from me later on in the month about the about progression with the dissertation. And I will post the link to the other dissertations either later on today or in the morning, in UK morning time, because we're I think we're 2 hours behind at the moment. So within 24 hours, I'll send you the link. Sorry. Great. Seeing no more questions. Well, for once in England, in the north of England, it's sunny, so I'm going to enjoy the sun for a change. instead of the cold grey cloud that we normally have here. So on that note, I shall wish you good night, and I look forward to chatting with you about this in the future, and more importantly, in the long term, looking forward to reading what you're going to write about in your dissertation. So thanks very much, and good night to everybody. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks,
so
everyone.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.